Hello and welcome to my video all about how to make your own Tensegrity pen holder. As usual, I'm way behind with any trend, but you might remember Tensegrity tables were very popular a couple of years ago, and today I'm finally jumping on that trend. The concept is basically that the finished tabletop will look like it's kind of floating, with only bits of yarn or cord holding it up. It's a fun design, and essentially the weight of the tabletop rests on one central piece of yarn, and the other pieces of yarn around the edge are only there for balance. I don't personally need a table, and woodwork is not my forte, so I thought about making a mini Tensegrity table from cardboard instead, and then I decided to make it more useful by incorporating a pen holder. This project only uses pretty basic supplies, so I hope you'll give it a go. The supplies you're going to need include cardboard, mountboard or matte board, a clear fast-drying glue, a utility knife and maybe a craft knife, a cutting mat, a metal ruler, a pencil and a marker pen, yarn, string or cord, a yarn needle, some paint and a paintbrush, although that's optional, small clips, an awl and some paper. Okay, so the first thing you need to do is make some paper templates. You'll need a 10 by 10 cm square with a 6 by 6 cm square cut out of the centre. And that 6 by 6 cm square you cut out will also be used as a template. And you'll also need a 9.5 by 6 cm rectangle. You'll also see here a 10 by 12 cm rectangle with a diagram drawn on. This was just me planning out how the two U-shaped pieces will go together later on. You don't need both U-shaped templates as they are both the same, you only need one. You can see the dimensions for this U-shape here, but in summary, one end is 10 by 1.5 centimeters, the other end is 6.5 by 2 centimeters, and the connecting or side section is 9.5 by 2 centimeters long in total. As long as you make the two U-shapes the same size as each other, you don't really need to make them exactly the same size as mine. Next, you need to use this U-shaped template to cut out 16 pieces of cardboard, all identical. Use a utility knife, a metal ruler and a cutting mat to do this, and obviously please keep your fingers out of the way. You can also use a craft knife if you want to be a bit more precise at the corners. Once you've cut out all of those shapes, first split them into 4 groups of 4. Then use some clear fast drying glue to glue them together into stacks and then leave them to dry. Then the next step is to add the central piece of yarn. So arrange 2 of the U-shaped blocks how you want them to be positioned in relation to each other in the final pen holder. Then cut 2 lengths of yarn that are long enough to span the gap between the ends of cardboard in the centre, plus at least 6 centimeters more at each end. Unravel each end of the yarn, but don't unravel the yarn which will be on show. Twist the yarn strands together for the section that will be visible, then glue the unravelled yarn to the top of the cardboard pieces. Then apply a generous amount of glue all over the top of these cardboard pieces and glue the other 2 U-shaped blocks on top. Then leave these to dry. The next step is then to cover these cardboard blocks with mountboard. This is an optional step, but I just think it looks a lot nicer with a mountboard covering, and it also adds a little bit of strength. To start, it's easiest to cut strips of mountboard that are as wide as the depth of the cardboard blocks. Then cut these strips to length so that they can be used to cover every side of the blocks. For the sides where the yarn is, you'll need to cut the board in half down the middle and then glue these pieces either side. You'll also notice that at this point I shortened the central strand of yarn to make the gaps more balanced. Glue all of these strips into place and then leave them to dry. It's best to wait until you've covered the sides with mountboard before cutting out the front and back pieces. This is because you'll need to take into consideration the thickness of the mountboard on the sides. So place the Tensegrity block, which is what I will now call it, onto the board, draw around it, and then cut that shape out. Do the same for the other side, and then glue both pieces into place. Next, use the 10 by 10 cm template from earlier to cut out one square of mountboard. However, if, like me, you've added a mountboard covering to the cardboard, you'll need to add about 5 mm to the length and width of this square first to account for the added thickness. So in the end, my piece of mountboard was 10.5 cm square. Use this square as a template to cut out 2 more identical pieces of mountboard. Then, from one of the pieces, cut out a square in the centre, just shy of 6 by 6 centimeters. And then just leave these squares to one side. Next, use the 9.5 by 6 cm template to cut out 4 pieces of cardboard, and use the 6 by 6 cm template to cut out 2 pieces. Glue the 4 9.5 by 6 cm pieces of cardboard into 2 stacks of 2. Then glue the 2 6 by 6 cm pieces together. Then glue the 3 stacks together into a U shape so that the larger pieces are on the outside of the smallest piece. Once dry, put this U shape on its side onto cardboard and draw around it. Cut out 2 pieces this same size and glue them together. Repeat once more so that you'll end up with the 2 widest sides of the pen holder. Glue these sides in place, and once dry you'll have a sturdy pen holder. You'll then need to use the same method as before to cover this pen holder with mountboard. So cut out 2 opposing sides first and glue them into place. Then trace, cut out and glue the remaining 2 sides. I then decided to paint the inside of the pen holder black using acrylic paint, but this step is optional. The next step is then to add the yarn strands to the outside of the pen holder. And to do this step, you're going to need 2 of the mountboard squares from earlier, including the one with the square cut out. Place one on top of the other and make a hole with an awl in each corner, pushing the awl through both layers completely. Be careful to support the corners of the board as you do this so that you don't bend or crease them as you push the awl through. You can see that one of my corners got a little bit creased, but if it had actually bent, I would have needed to recut the square. You then need 2 strands of yarn per corner of the solid square, so 8 strands in total. Feed 2 strands at a time into a yarn needle, and feed this needle into one of the holes in the solid square. The easiest way to thread a yarn needle is to fold the yarn strands over the needle, press those strands between your fingers, and then push the folded ends into the eye of the needle. It's best to cut strands that are too long, as you don't want to realise later that they're not long enough. I used 40cm lengths, and that's really the minimum I would suggest. You want approximately 5cm of the yarn strands on one side of this square. You then need to unravel these sections of yarn and glue them onto the mountboard. Apply a generous amount of glue on this entire side of the square and add the other solid square of mountboard on top. Make sure the squares are lined up, then use clips to hold them together or put something heavy on top until the glue dries. Then take the piece of mountboard with the square cut out and glue it onto the top of the pen holder. And now the next step is to glue all of the sections together. So place the mountboard square facing upwards so that the yarn strands leave from the top, and glue the Tensegrity block to the centre. You might want to mark the centre with a pencil before you do this. Next, place the pen holder upside down on your table and glue the other side of the Tensegrity block to the base. Then place a weight on top until the glue dries. Once the glue has dried, you'll need to feed the strands of yarn leaving the base into a yarn needle. Then take this needle through the corresponding hole in the pen holder, like so. Do this for each pair of yarn strands. Then add a clip to the yarn strands at the top to keep them in place. Do your best to clip the yarn strands at the top so that they're all as equal in length as you can get them. Then place this entire piece the right way up and keep adjusting the clips until the pen holder is even and balanced. Twist these clips in one direction to twist the yarn strands together. Try and twist all of the yarn by approximately the same amount. Once you're happy with how it looks, you can then use a marker pen to mark the yarn strands just above the top of the pen holder. Then remove the clips one by one and knot the pairs of yarn strands together, trying to get the knot to sit where you just made the pen mark. If everything is still even and balanced, you can now glue these knots in place. If it's a little bit wonky, you can twist the knots to tighten the yarn strands in order to balance everything out again. Then glue these knots in place. And then add another knot on top. And then once you've finished, you can cut off the excess yarn. And that's it, you've now completed your pen holder. And here you can see the finished result. Even though it wobbles when you move it, as you can see, it is actually very sturdy and it can hold a lot of pens. I really hope you enjoyed this project and thank you very much for watching.